Awesome. All right. Well, if you are joining us in back-to-back sessions, you just wrapped up a session with a few engineers here at Jam City. I learned several different things in that session, more about what they did in their roles, more about how they work with other artists. And I'm really, really excited, really honored actually to continue the next session here with one of our leaders here at Jam City, a leader who co-leads one of our studios, one of our most successful studios, our Burbank studio. I am so excited to be joined this afternoon by our VP and co-GM, Nacia Chambers. I will allow Nacia to introduce themselves a little bit more in just one second, but just to give a little bit of context as to this specific session, we'll be talking about breaking into the industry and what that means, what that looks like, and I feel like Nacia is the pro at this. With over 15 years of experience in gaming, Nacia has worked through multiple different studios, different teams at different organizations, and has seen gaming grow into the business that it is even now. So I'm so excited to hear Nacia's input. But without further ado, Nacia, would you mind introducing yourself and giving us a little bit more context as to you, your pronouns, your role here at Jam City, and how did you get to where you're at?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate the very kind words. Yeah, sure. So my name, as Andrew said, is Nacia. My pronouns are she and her. He introduced me well. I'm a GM here at Jam City, overseeing our Burbank studio, which is responsible for most of the Disney games that you're seeing in the Jam City portfolio. So Disney Emoji Blitz, most recently Disney Pop Town. If you haven't played, I would encourage you to go check them out on the App Store today. And basically what my job entails is kind of overseeing the studio, and that goes from an operational perspective, including game production, but also things like facilities and making sure that we're having fun here at the studio, and that the teams are not only doing good work, but are enjoying the work that they're doing. A lot of interfacing with HQ and HR, hiring, talent planning, making sure that folks have opportunities here at Jam City, both in our studio and in the larger company. I'm a sounding board for the game teams. I've had a lot of experience. Don't do as much hands-on work anymore, but definitely love to help and roll up my sleeves when they're looking for some advice or some problems that need some additional, thinking on. And then I think, one of our bigger jobs is being the connective tissue from our studio here in Burbank to our HQ in Culver City. So lots of conversations that pertain to how our business in Burbank is aligned into the larger Jam City strategy.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that great overview. And you do a lot in your current role, and I'm sure nowhere before, or years ago, did you imagine you would be doing so many different moving things in one sole role. So let's take it back to the beginning for a second. What made you first consider a career in gaming? Like, when was that switch? And tell us about the moment, and maybe a few years after that, how did you get into games?
Sure. To be honest with you, it wasn't really a conscious choice. I moved to Los Angeles back in the early 2000s, and I wanted to work in entertainment, like whatever that means, right? Like I just wanted to work in entertainment. So I got a job at Disney as an executive assistant, and I was lucky enough to land in a creative department. And so I just kind of looked around at what people were doing, and I noticed that there was these game producers, and I saw them, and I was like, I think I could do that. And so it was more of opportunistic. Like I saw people around me doing inspiring things. I expressed some interest in trying to learn more about that. And my bosses were really supportive, and they were like, look, if you can give us 2 years in the job that you're in, we want to support you in growing. And they made good on that promise. So I moved into games. I started making little Flash website games for Disney.com, moved from there into virtual worlds, from there into mobile, where I've spent the majority of my career over the last kind of 7-ish years in mobile. So once I got into games, I never looked back, because you get kind of the nice mix of creativity and technology and the coming together of really awesome teams that are working well to deliver a creative product. And if that's not entertainment, I don't know what is.
I so feel that. That was very similar to me too, coming from tech and then joining games 3 or 4 years ago. You kind of get this bug where you're working alongside studio teams and you see how fun it is, and you see the creativity, but you also get this like tech side of stuff that for me was really like what was I was used to. So then that having the intersection of entertainment, creativity, tech, it's like a perfect just intersection for a lot of innovation in a way, and a lot of just like pride that comes with it too. So that's awesome. And I feel like I remember first coming into gaming on that note, there was a lot of different positions in games. And I remember learning about, okay, there's producers, also can be called project managers, there's engineers, there's game designers. And I think for somebody who's maybe looking at the industry for the first time, it could maybe feel a little bit overwhelming because you know that you want to work on games, you want to get your hands on games, but you're not sure what path you want to take, or you're not sure where to begin. I'm curious to hear from your perspective now, being in the industry for as long as you have been, and in your current role, what advice maybe would you give to somebody who's unsure of what path to take or unsure of where to really begin?
Sure. I mean, it's a really interesting question. And, I think first and foremost, just being curious, especially at the start of your career, making sure that you're being open and curious about what's out there. You kind of touched on some of the roles, but some of the things that you can go and do is look at job postings at games companies and just kind of get a sense of the various roles that are even out there. So like software engineering, those are the people that actually write the code that powers these games. There's game designers who are kind of responsible for the player, the player experience and making sure that the games are fun at the core. Producers, as you said, tend to manage schedules and budgets and teams and make sure that like the whole team together is working in a cohesive way and an efficient way. There's also folks like analysts and product managers who are really focused on business and data analytics and looking out into the marketplace and like making great recommendations to the team to make these games successful. But then on the like completely opposite side, there's marketers and community managers and user acquisition. So there's just so many roles within the gaming industry. You kind of just have to be curious, and then you have to do a lot of self-reflection about like, what am I good at? Like, where are my skills going to be best suited? And some of those things that I just mentioned, like software engineering, art, you're going to have to like get training on that. Whereas for me, I was like, I'm not an artist. I'm not going to go to art school. I'm probably not going to learn how to code. But I'm really good at people management, at leadership. I'm really good at like, spreadsheets and schedules and like delivering. And so like, I just naturally kind of gravitated to that production discipline. The other way that I would suggest for folks to get in is at the ground floor, similar to like what I just described with my experience. I started as an executive assistant, like looked around at what people were doing, watched and saw like, oh, I think I could emulate that. So executive assistant is one, QA is another really great way to get your foot in the door, is to like start by playing games. And yes, like that is it can be a very monotonous job. You're playing the same game over and over and over and over again. But while you're doing that, it's adding value to the game team. You're building those relationships. And then you have that opportunity to look around you and see what else might be a good fit for you. And then you can kind of pursue that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely think opportunities, whether it's in the QA space or just opportunities where you can learn a little bit more about like what teams are there in games. I remember for me, like whether that's in QA, if you're in QA, you see so much about, okay, there's developers, there's community managers, there's marketing. So really finding that role that allows you to see other roles is kind of a great launching pad. I think one of the things that comes up, and I talked about this with the engineers in the previous sessions, but one of the things that comes up when people consider kind of the bridge between, like, let's say for this case, graduating college and then going into games, is passion projects. People consider that as a good way to show off experience, and oftentimes from a recruiting lens, it could be tough to seek out students that maybe don't have experience, and it could be hard to move them through the funnel without any sort of signs on their resume or their backgrounds that show that they have some sort of experience within development. So I'd love to know from your perspective as GM, what do you think about passion projects? Are they valuable? And if so, where do students begin, or how do they even begin to think about a passion project?
Sure. So I might not be the right person to answer that specific question. I've spent most of my career like in corporate. And so I haven't done a lot of thinking about passion projects, but I'm going to try my best. I think where I have seen this be most successful is in interviews. So we've had like software engineers who have come in with playable prototypes of something that they've built in their off time. especially when it's really relevant to the job that they're applying for, or where it's showing off something that's like, like we make a lot of color matching games. And so if there's like a piece of innovative a mechanic in their prototype that's like something that you haven't seen in another matching game, it's like, oh, that's directly relevant. This person clearly gets what we're trying to do here.
Right.
Another area is like, if, a lot of times, a lot of these games is about player feedback, like telling the player what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and making them feel good moment to moment to moment. So I've seen these prototypes that have come into interviews where it's like, the feedback is just so juicy, and it's like, oh, that's the kind of skill set that we need on these games. And so, I think it's good to do that stuff. I would never discourage anybody from approaching like doing work on their own and these passion projects, but you also want to make sure that it kind of could be a double-edged sword, because you don't know who the recruiter and who the hiring managers are and like what level of imagination they're going to bring to your project. And so you don't want to show up with something that maybe isn't as polished as they're used to seeing, and them not be able to see past that lack of polish. And maybe you're like a software engineer, you're not an artist, and because the art doesn't look good, like they can't see through that to see what's underneath it. Obviously, that's not the case in every scenario, but you've got to kind of weigh the pros and the cons, and like, is this tool going to help me or might it hinder me? And so you've got to kind of use your own discretion. Like I said, I would never discourage anybody from working on those, because if nothing else, you're continuing to hone your skills, and it gives you another, especially if these are like published projects, like, which is very easy to do on iOS and Android these days. Like if you actually publish a game, you can put that on your resume. Even if like there's only 10 people that have played your game, you have a published game. So it's building resume, it's building skills.
100%. I mean, even if it's just a few players, if someone has it on their resume and they have some sort of mock-ups or some sort of content on their website about the game, I mean, automatically from just even recruiter lens, it catches my eye, right? Because it's games and it's already putting you in this bucket that might separate you from others. And I think on the note of also, if you're an engineer and you're not the best artist, like I think that's where I love seeing different students who also take it upon themselves to like network with other artists, maybe who are students in their same student cohorts, and they build something together on the side, and then they turn that into something bigger than what it is, and maybe they put it into a pitch contest or something like that. So I love kind of your input though on that double-edged sword, right? It's being careful and being kind of thoughtful about the specific maybe team you're applying for, or the specific publisher that you're applying for, and thinking, is it a good fit, or maybe developing something specific for that as well too. So on the note of also thinking about, kind of transitioning from maybe like college into the workforce as well too, one question that I often see from students, or from anyone for that matter, who's interested in breaking into games is, do I have to have a game design degree? And do I have to have gone to a traditional four-year school in game design to then go into the gaming industry? So from your perspective, like kind of what's the value on a game design degree, and is it an absolute essential for breaking into games?
Cool. So I think my perspective is that experience will always trump education. I think, I will say some of the game designers that I work with now didn't start with a game design degree. And so it is absolutely not essential. That being said, the gaming industry has changed a lot in the 15 years that I've been working in it. And I think it's much more competitive now than it was, 10, 15 years ago, when some of these folks were getting into their roles. And so it never hurts, right? And I think especially for entry-level roles, hiring managers know that those folks aren't going to have experience. Like when you're coming fresh out of college, like you might have an internship, but you're not going to have years and years of game design experience. And so that's when they are looking at like, okay, well, what kind of education do you have? And so I think particularly for game design, that is one that if like you're trying to get your foot in the door and you don't have a ton of experience, you don't have a lot of internship experience, it definitely helps. But not necessarily required. As I said, like I think my game design director that works here in the Burbank studio, I think he has an art degree. So it's not the only way in.
Yeah, agreed on that 100%. And I think on that note too, there's a theme that comes up constantly when you're talking about like your way in, which is also like networking. I always love to ask leaders in any business their perspective on networking? Because I'm sure in one way or another, it's helped you kind of transition throughout your career as well too. So I'm curious to also learn kind of what's your overall thought on kind of networking when you first begin your career, and where should people look to if they want to network specifically with gaming professionals?
Sure. Um, I will be completely honest. I did not go to a gaming school, but I can only imagine that similar to my school, there are probably opportunities that your schools are presenting you. So that's one place for sure. Another place is Google. If you just go and do a quick little Google search, you'll find events and conferences, even like online communities of gaming professionals, whether it's on Reddit or in other places, where you can kind of meet and collaborate with like-minded professionals. And I think, in my experience, the key to networking is just like, being a cool person, no matter where you are. So if you're going to one of these events and maybe you can't afford to get into it, but you are going to go to the expo floor, like be a cool person, strike up a conversation, be the kind of person that people want to hang out with, like maybe meet somebody at the hotel bar, that kind of thing. Because you'll be surprised as you're exchanging information, like where people will be like, oh, I met that guy, he seemed really smart, or I met that woman, she seemed really on top of it, like I'm going to give her a call and see if she's working right now. She might have some freelance work or something like that. So like you just got to like remember that every moment is a networking moment. And then as you start to get into your career, like you just got to keep on top of it too. Like, you as you start to meet people, definitely connect with them on social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever that is, so that as people kind of come and go out of different roles, whether it's internships or full-time roles, you're building that network and building that basket of people that will help you. This industry is relatively small, and so you'll bump into the same people over and over and over and over again.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the second time I hear that in the span of an hour. This industry is fairly small, and I absolutely agree with that. I think you'll meet somebody who's now at this place, but they're working with the same person they were working here, and similar team. So somewhere or another, everyone's kind of interconnected, just given their experiences. I also love that you touched on a little bit of like maintaining those relationships as well too, and how important that is. I'm curious, as you've worked your way now into leadership now and into leadership roles, how have you maintained relationships? Do you find it's as easy as like just reaching out every now and then, or does it naturally flow? How have you done that?
It's one of the harder things, to be honest with you. It takes time and it takes effort, and it can be so easy to just kind of get very focused on the task at hand and right. What's right in front of you. And so like, I will be the first to admit, I am not the best at it, but yes, when you can set time away from your schedule and actually plan that it's like, here's an hour, I'm going to plan an hour every 2 weeks and put it in your calendar that like, this is the time that I'm going to go and like text somebody or message somebody on LinkedIn, see somebody that I really liked working with 4 years ago that I haven't seen, like, what are they up to? Oh, they're working at this new cool place. Like, ask them how it's going, like that kind of stuff. It does take like actual focus and effort, but it's worth it. And like I said before, just like personal relationships, like the more people enjoy being around you, the more people that enjoy working with you, they're doing the same thing as they're going back through their contacts, every year, every 6 months, they're going to be like, oh, I wonder what Nacia's up to. Let me check her out. Oh, she's at Jam City now. How's that new role at Jam City? That kind of stuff. You'll see those pop up from occasion, on occasion.
I love that. I mean, I definitely think it takes intention, right? I think as goes with any relationships in our lives, like there's a lot of intention that goes into like maintaining them. And then also, knowing how to reach out. And I think in your professional life, it's so important to really, like you said, like reaching out, going through your contact list, or just staying aware of where your fellow peers are at and understanding like awareness of like just the space and the gaming space and what's happening where. And I think that can be such an important thing as you're growing into different roles in your career as well too. I guess now switching things off of the topic of just, looking at the industry within it and now kind of looking at the industry from an external lens, maybe for somebody who wants to get into the industry for a second. What I love about your background is that it didn't automatically just hit and kick off in games one day, right? You like you said, you came to LA with the intention of wanting to go into entertainment. So oftentimes I think there's roles within games that are also exist outside of games, for example, like production, right? And I think oftentimes let's say like there's people within TV or film or music who work in production, and they realize I'm actually an avid gamer. I really enjoy games, but can't even imagine what it would be like to be a producer. They have no idea that these roles exist in gaming. What advice would you maybe give to these folks who are outside of the industry? Maybe they have similar roles, but they have no idea or they're afraid of making the leap into games.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, this is kind of the same advice that I would give to anybody who is trying to make a move into a slightly different industry, is to don't expect a lateral move, because while there are tons of similarities between film production, TV production, and game production, there are enough differences that you're going to have to learn the ropes. And so if you're a producer that's working on, a reality TV show, surely there are some transferable skills, but like you're going to have to kind of learn the ropes. So I would expect you might want to take you want to target an associate producer job in games. And then it comes back to that point I was making earlier, where it's like looking at JDs that are posted and like really being honest and saying like, okay, here are the transferable skills. These are the things that are the same. These are the areas that like sound new to me. They sound like something I've never done before. And being really honest about those things. I think that'll give you a leg up in an interview. Is like when you can come to the table of an interview and be like, this is where I rock. I can do this. I can do this. Here are my areas of opportunity. I know I'm self-reflective enough to know that those are areas of opportunity and I can't wait to learn about them. Or like, here's how I think I would approach learning about them. So that's one way. Another thing would be is to like, see if you have anybody in your network who's doing that job, even if it's like, several people removed, like, your mom's friend is a producer at X, Y, and Z game company. Like, see if they'll do an informational interview with you and kind of tell them about what you're doing, ask them about what their job is, ask them like candidly where they think the differences are, and then you can start to like dig in on those differences. I mean, the one that comes, I have actually a little bit of like an inside here, is because I went to film school, so I kind of know the differences. A lot of it's going to come to technology. Like obviously there's technology in film and television. It's slightly different when we're writing code, and like especially in mobile, we're developing assets that need to perform on these like devices that don't have all the computing power of a PC or a console. So like there's a lot of technical information that goes into these jobs, and that is probably the steepest learning curve. But again, if you can come to that with some curiosity and some excitement, I think that really shows well in an interview.
You are just dropping nuggets of wisdom. These are things that I say all the time, right? Set up informational interviews. But also what I love that you started off with was a sense of like self-awareness and understanding like, what am I missing that maybe, or what do I have? What do I look at this job description, maybe I already am good at project planning or management or managing a team, but maybe I don't have the skill in technical, or maybe I don't know how to use Unity, or I've never touched Unity, or whatever the case is, right? And then taking it upon yourself to find people in your network that can maybe teach you or could get you started off with where to learn those things. I feel like that's the best tool that you have, is really your network, and your network can be your professional network, your personal network as well too. But I love that you touched on the sense of knowing kind of yourself and your skill set and kind of where to begin with that.
And I think particularly for those folks that are trying to move across industries, like that's where cover letters can really help, because your resume is not going to immediately like jump off the pages of like, oh yeah, they check all the boxes, let's definitely get them into an interview. And so that's where a cover letter can really help, is that it's like, I'm self-aware, here's what I know I need to learn, here's how I'm approaching that, like here's what I think the value is I can bring to your organization. I don't always recommend cover letters because sometimes they don't get read, but in that case where you are trying to transverse an industry, it's helpful.
Amazing. All right. Well, now looking at the future of the industry for a little bit, also love to pick leaders' minds when it comes to this and how they think about the future of the industry that they're in. And for this question, we can think about it from the lens of like the entire industry. Where do you see right now in the industry, either a niche or a specific maybe discipline that's booming, that you're like, oh man, that team or that specific discipline is going to take off 5-10 years from now? People should really be curious to learn about that part of the business. What's your take on that?
Sure. I mean, mobile is continuing to grow. We see that year over year. There's like a little device that's in everybody's pocket, and they can play games on that. And so it's just so accessible that is continuing to be a growth area of the games industry. So I definitely recommend folks checking that out. We have jobs posted on the Jam City website if you're interested in a job at Jam City. I think the same is true about like kind of the AR VR space. I know a lot of people are investing there. I can't do it. I get very car sick. So I cannot wear the headset. I get too motion sickness. Esports is another area too that's growing. So those are probably the areas that I would focus on if I were kind of coming in new. Mobile, like I said, is very accessible, not only from an audience perspective, but from a player perspective, which you can kind of pick up and do your research across the mobile industry and get a sense of like the differences, similarities between mid-core and casual and hyper casual, and kind of learn a lot just by doing some research there.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I couldn't agree more. I think, of course, mobile, AR, VR, like you mentioned, esports, every single time I get on the phone with whether it's students or other professionals, like esports is like one of the things that's always talked about, just given how big that alone is in its way, it's industry, because there's so many facets of it. A little bit I guess piggybacking off that question is, do you have any sort of insight or advice for maybe someone who wants to maintain a level of awareness on the industry? Do you use any specific tools to stay on top of your industry news? Is there anything that you would give in terms of how do I stay on top of all the things that's happening in gaming?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're have the benefit of Jam City, and we've got a bunch of research teams that like just deliver all of this stuff to our inbox. So it's interesting that you asked that question. Let me think. I mean, you can definitely set up Google alerts. That's one of the ways. So you can pick keywords and set up Google alerts. They'll send you messages to your inbox every day that will kind of, you're just like, for instance, Disney Emoji Blitz. I have a Google alert on that, so I can always hear what's in the news about that game. You can do the same thing across, multiple search words. So that's one way. There's all kinds of industry magazines and online, kind of resources that you can read about. You can follow like gaming and tech in like your Apple news feed. You can follow gaming and tech like in all of kind of the news aggregators. That's a good way to do it as well.
Very cool. No, I definitely think online, right? Staying on top of online news or setting up keywords or whatnot is super, super helpful. I also think like I keep going back to the sense of like your network, right, is super important, and just being able to have informational conversations, and also people that you connect with on LinkedIn ultimately feeds into your main feed, right? So anything that they're engaging with, you're constantly staying on top of news that way. So super helpful. A few more questions for you, but one that I would kind of like to go to right now is kind of looking back at your career in gaming and thinking about all the different teams that you worked on and all the different roles that you had. If you could give yourself one piece of advice that you wish you would have given yourself to now, what would that piece of advice have been?
Sure. I think I have two for you. I'll start with one, is to just stay open and stay curious. I kind of hit that point earlier, but really focus on the product, really focus on the people around you and making them successful. I think I spent a lot of time in my early career trying to create an identity of like, well, I'm this kind of producer, I'm not that kind of producer, I'm really good at creative, but I'm not very good at technology. And like all of that, like kind of self-talk was kind of fear-based. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I was kind of creating this box around me of like what I fit into. And I think really where my career excelled is when I kind of was able to let down those walls and just get curious and say like, I want to do it all. I want to learn it all. I want to maybe be fearless and like jump in on like the things that I'm not good at and learn more about them. Like I said, being curious, being open, like keeping an open mind and being willing to like kind of zig and zag, I think is really important. And then I think the other thing, I think I touched on this before, it's one of those things that I always come back to is that like making sure that you're showing up as a person that people want to be around. You can't stress it enough that like we spend, a third of our life at work. And if you're the kind of person that people like working with and like spending time with, that will do you so well throughout your career, like you're going to be one of those people that, like, especially if you're proficient at your job and you're fun and you make it a joy to be there, like people are going to call you and they're going to want to work with you in the future. So like low ego, be curious, and open.
All really good pieces. I feel like the interpersonal like skill that you have just obviously shows throughout your career, and it's so important that you just show up as a person that you want to work with as well too. I think it speaks volumes. Well, awesome. Just two more quick questions for you. They're a little bit fun in nature, and I wanted to get your authentic input on them. Number one, I asked this question to our engineers earlier, and I'd love to hear your input. If you could have been the developer on any team or any game, excuse me, or in your case, it could be the executive producer on any game that has existed in the history of gaming, what would the game be and why?
Oh my gosh, that's such an interesting question. Like, it's almost hard for me to answer because I so value my experiences. Like, I'm so proud of what I've done on Disney Emoji Blitz. I got to work on Where's My Water, which are like kind of like touchstone mobile games, like both of those games. So it's hard for me to like say like, oh, I wish I worked on another game because I love those games so much. But I mean, Candy Crush was obviously revolutionary for the mobile industry. Like, if I could have been the like creator of that game, like, that's a prestige. You kind of get the like gold star for transforming an industry.
Absolutely. No, I agree. There's always those games that kind of change the landscape a little bit. And you're like, man, like for me, if I could have developed Tetris, I mean, come on, I would have developed Tetris, right? So I definitely think that there's those change maker games. So Candy Crush is a good one. Awesome. And my last question for you is, what excites you the most about the future of the industry? Is there anything that you're seeing now, and it doesn't have to be related to games or even production or development? Is there anything you're seeing now in the industry that excites you the most and kind of get you excited for what's to come?
Yeah, I have been so focused on like kind of mobile, casual mobile, and so it's kind of hard for me to see outside of that. What I have been most excited by recently is the up and coming talent. Like, we've been going through a little bit of a growth spurt here in our Burbank office. We've been growing, and some of the new talent that is coming in across function, like we're getting amazing engineers that are kind of green in their career. We're getting designers, we're getting artists that are just like showing up with all of those values that I just kind of described. And like, I'm just really inspired by the up and coming talent that is kind of fueling the future of the industry. I think that, there's, for the longest time, this has been such like a white boys club, and it's, you can really start to see the shift. At least in our studio, I'm starting to really see that this is a more diverse and more inclusive place to be, and that the talent is so amazing that's coming in. It like gives me a lot of hope for what the future is going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think about, teams or companies outside of Jam City, like Games for Change, that are developing games for different purposes and different backgrounds. I think those are so valuable. And I always love hearing, students talk about just how they developed something that was a game talking about the neighborhood that they grew up in a certain part of the Bay Area. And it's so real and authentic versus maybe what we've traditionally seen in gaming. So I love that the stories of different backgrounds are being brought to the center of the industry. So amazing.
Yeah, not even stories, like their experiences, like they're bringing a different perspective that we never had before. And like, they're bringing such a fresh vision and a fresh take. I'm really inspired by them.
Well, Nacia, I've absolutely enjoyed getting your insight on all of these different things, from networking to also to how to go about what roles that you're considering as well too. This has been indispensable. I would love to wrap up with just one last thing. If there's anything else that you would like to share for maybe anyone right now who's watching this and is considering a role in games, any other parting words that you want to share with them?
Yeah, I know that earlier I said be open and be flexible. I still believe that, but also if you know where you want to be focused on that. I think, when you have a really clear goal of where you want to go, like that gives you an anchor, and you can always pivot off course, and you can be curious and maybe zig and zag, but it takes commitment. just like, when people talk about like acting or getting into film, you have to really be committed to it. And it's not always going to be a straight path, and you're going to get some rejections and all of that. You've got to just take it in stride. I think if you're passionate and you show up as the kind of people or the kind of person that people want to be around, like it'll happen at some point.
I'm noticing some themes. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Nacia. On that note, we'll wrap things up here. We're finishing just a few minutes early here before the end of the session, but for anyone who is going into our next few sessions, we have another session in just a few minutes, beginning with our head of DE&I here at Jam City, Fran Phillips, who will be talking a little bit more about the value of inclusivity in the industry as well too. But a huge thank you to our co-GM and VP of our Burbank studio, Nacia Chambers, for joining us. Thank you for everyone for tuning in, and we'll see everyone in just a few minutes at our next chat. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.